The ship broke through the clouds of a quiet alien world. The human traveler, a lone explorer who had crossed many stars, watched the land stretch wide beneath him. The ground was green with strange forests, and rivers of silver water twisted like veins across the land. For a moment he thought the place looked peaceful, almost untouched. He landed near a wide clearing where tall figures waited. They stood in silence at first, their long eyes fixed on him, their tall frames holding a calm strength. Then they lifted their hands and smiled in a way that seemed almost too perfect. He stepped out carefully. The air was light, carrying a faint sweet scent, and the ground felt soft under his boots. The aliens moved closer, their steps slow and careful as if they wanted him to feel safe. One of them spoke in a soft musical tone. The words were strange, but the meaning came clear in his mind. They welcomed him. They called him guest. They bowed their heads in honor. He felt a wave of relief. After so many lonely journeys, the warmth of their voices filled him with a strange comfort. They guided him to their settlement. It was built of white stone that gleamed even under the dull sun. The walls carried marks that looked like symbols, maybe stories of the tribe. The people watched from doorways, their faces calm, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Children ran quietly along the edges, not with laughter but with soft whispers, as though laughter was forbidden here. He noticed it, but he told himself that different worlds had different ways. They brought him food, fruits with golden skin and water that tasted like cool honey. He ate carefully, not knowing if his body could take their food, but nothing seemed wrong. They watched him eat, and their faces lit with joy. It was almost too much the way they stared, as though every bite he took was proof of something greater than himself. He felt proud yet uneasy. Night fell quickly, the sky turning black, filled with moons that hung low. The tribe led him to a house built just for him. The walls were smooth, the bed soft, and the roof open to the stars. They told him he would rest well, and that tomorrow there would be celebration. Their voices carried a strange rhythm when they said it, as if the word celebration had a deeper meaning than joy. He lay down, but sleep was far from him. He could hear them outside. Drums began, slow at first, then faster. Voices rose in chants, not wild, but steady like the beat of a heart. He turned on his bed, telling himself it was only a festival, a way to honor a guest. But the sound felt heavier than celebration. It was as if the ground itself was moving with the beat. His chest tightened, and he pulled the blanket closer. After a while, he rose and peered outside. In the distance, he saw fire burning high in a circle. Figures moved around it, their shadows long and bending. They lifted their arms to the flames, and their voices climbed higher. For a moment, he thought he saw eyes flash in the light, all turning toward him at once. He pulled back quickly, heart racing, breath caught in his throat. He returned to the bed, but he could not rest. The chant went on, slow and endless. It was not the music of joy. It was the music of a promise, or maybe a warning. He remembered the smiles, the way they had called him guest, the way they had watched him eat as if it meant something greater. Now it struck him that hospitality could be a mask, and that behind the kindness of strangers there might be something else, something waiting for him in the dark. When the drums finally stopped, the silence was even worse. It felt as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for him to move. He stared at the ceiling and wondered if tomorrow's celebration was meant for him, or about him. The sun rose pale and wide, spreading its light over the strange white stones of the settlement. The human awoke with tired eyes, for he had not truly slept. The silence of the night still weighed on him, and though the air was fresh and the sky calm, unease lingered in his chest. As he stepped outside, the tribe gathered, waiting as if they had stood there for hours. Their smiles were wide, their bodies draped in cloth that shimmered with colors he could not name. They offered him a drink in a clear vessel, water mixed with herbs that gave off a sharp smell. The alien who handed it to him bowed low, speaking words that carried weight. The human could not understand every phrase, but one word repeated often: trust. He drank, forcing a polite smile, and the crowd cheered softly, a sound that was too controlled to be real joy. He could not help but feel as though he had just agreed to something unspoken. They led him through the village with great care, showing him their gardens, their carvings, their way of life. Every place they passed seemed to hold meaning, yet every meaning was hidden. He noticed again how quiet the children were, how still the elders stood, how every eye followed him. The human wanted to believe he was welcome, that this kindness was real, but the weight of their stares pressed against his skin. One figure, younger than the rest, walked close to him. This alien's eyes held a different light, one less polished, more restless. While the other smiled too much, this one's face held a shadow of concern. As the tribe turned away for a moment, the young alien leaned close and whispered words in broken human speech. "Not all gift is gift," the voice warned. "Trust hides danger." The words struck him cold, but before he could ask, the alien slipped back into the crowd, face once again calm, as if the warning had never been spoken. The day stretched on with ritual after ritual. At one point they painted his hands with a glowing substance that seeped into his skin, leaving behind a faint mark that pulsed with warmth. They said it was blessing, a bond between guest and tribe. Yet as the human looked at the mark, he felt more chained than honored. The tribe clapped in rhythm, chanting his name in tones that sounded both kind and commanding. When they brought him food again, he hesitated. The fruits gleamed too brightly, the drink shimmered too strangely. The crowd leaned forward, waiting, as though the act of eating was not nourishment but agreement. He forced himself to take small bites, and again the cheer rose, controlled, like a choir that had rehearsed it many times before. The young alien appeared again near the evening fire. Their eyes darted nervously as they handed the human a small piece of stone, etched with markings. "Tonight, listen," the alien whispered, then hurried away before others noticed. The human hid the stone in his pocket, heart pounding. As night returned, the drums began once more. The sound was slower now, heavier, like the world itself was keeping time. Flames lit the central square, and the tribe gathered in a wide circle. They called for him to step into the light. He obeyed, though his chest tightened with every step. They surrounded him, chanting words he could not fully understand, though he caught fragments that made his skin crawl. Chosen, bond, union. The leader of the tribe, taller than the rest and draped in a cloak of deep red, placed both hands on the human's shoulders. Their eyes shone bright, and in that gaze was something more than welcome. It was possession. They spoke long phrases, each word heavy, and the crowd answered in unison. At the end, the leader traced the glowing mark on his hand, pressing it until the heat grew painful. The human forced a smile, nodding, though inside his thoughts were racing. He remembered the whispered warning, the strange stone in his pocket, the heavy word trust repeated again and again. What if this entire welcome was not kindness, but a cage built with smiles and soft voices? What if every gift was a chain, and every ritual another step in a plan he could not yet see? The crowd cheered as the leader raised his arm, declaring something final. The human could not understand the full speech, but the crowd's response was clear. They were not cheering him as guest. They were praising him as something else entirely. When the fire burned low, the tribe allowed him back to the guest house. The young alien waited in the shadows near the door. They whispered only 3 words before vanishing again into the dark. Hospitality is lie. The human sat alone in the silent house, staring at the glowing mark on his hand, the echo of drums still beating in his skull. He could no longer deny the truth pressing in on him. This was not celebration. This was not kindness. Something was being prepared, and he was not guest but center. The morning came with silence instead of song. No chants, no music, only the sound of wind brushing through the alien trees. The human stepped outside, expecting smiles and greetings, but the tribe stood in rows along the path, their faces calm and unreadable. The leader raised a hand, and the crowd parted to reveal a long walkway leading away from the village. Without words, they gestured for him to follow. His stomach twisted as he obeyed, each step carrying him deeper into a place he had not been shown before. The path wound between tall stones carved with strange markings. Some were symbols he had seen on the village walls, but others were new, shapes that looked like eyes, circles crossed with jagged lines, and spirals that seemed to move if he stared too long. The stones grew larger as they went, until they formed an arch that towered over him. Beyond the arch lay a wide field, flat and bare, except for a single massive circle drawn into the earth. Around the circle stood more of the tribe, waiting in silence. They guided him to the center of the circle. The ground there felt different, warmer, as if the soil held fire beneath it. He wanted to step back, but the leader approached and pressed a hand against his chest. Their voice carried across the field, every word sharp and heavy. The crowd responded, chanting, and the sound rolled like thunder. The human understood only fragments, but those fragments cut deep. chosen future bond mate. His heart hammered. The leader lifted his hand, showing the glowing mark that had been burned into his skin. The crowd roared in approval, their calm faces breaking into something fierce and hungry. He tried to speak, to ask what all this meant, but his words vanished in the storm of their voices. It was not a celebration. It was a declaration, and he was the center of it. He saw movement at the edge of the circle. The young alien who had warned him before stood there, eyes wide, face pale. When their gaze met his, they made a small gesture. 2 fingers pressed against their lips, then pointed toward the ground. A warning to stay quiet. A warning that something worse would come if he spoke. The leader began to chant a new verse, one that rose and fell like a tide. The tribe joined in, their voices weaving together until the sound became one. As they chanted, the symbols carved in the stones around the field began to glow faintly. The ground beneath his feet grew hotter. He felt his mark burning again, the light spreading up his arm like fire under his skin. The crowd pressed closer, their bodies swaying in rhythm, their eyes locked on him as though they were drawing strength from his pain. He forced himself not to collapse. He bit down on the panic rising in his throat, trying to steady his breath. He told himself he had faced worse dangers in the void of space, but deep inside, he knew this was different. Space had rules. Space had silence. This world had voices, and those voices carried power. The leader finally stopped the chant, and silence fell heavy across the field. Then, with slow hands, they lifted a piece of cloth and placed it over his shoulders. It was heavy, woven with threads that shimmered like liquid metal. As it settled on him, the crowd bowed as one. Their heads touched the earth. Their bodies trembled. He was not just a guest anymore. He was something else, something bound to their belief. The young alien moved closer through the crowd, their steps careful, their face lowered to avoid notice. When they reached him, they bent down as if bowing too, but whispered a sharp breath against his ear. "You are not guest. You are promise." The words froze his blood. He wanted to ask what kind of promise, but the alien had already slipped back, vanishing into the sea of bodies. The leader raised their hand again, and the crowd rose as one. They began to sing, softer now, a sound like mourning mixed with worship. The human felt trapped in the middle of it, his body cloaked, his hand marked, his name twisted into a chant. He did not know what the promise meant, but the way their eyes shone told him it was not a choice. It was a fate. When the ritual ended, the tribe escorted him back to the village. No one spoke. Their silence was heavier than their chants, and their smiles no longer reached their eyes. They left him at the guest house, where food and drink waited. He did not touch them. Instead, he pulled the stone from his pocket, the one the young alien had given him. He studied the marks on it, and slowly, painfully, he realized they matched the glowing symbols on the sacred stones outside. The stone was not just a warning. It was a key, a map, perhaps even a way out. But the meaning was not clear, and time was slipping away. Tomorrow they would call him again, and tomorrow the circle would claim him deeper. He sat in the dark, clutching the stone, listening to the faint hum of drums starting once more in the distance. He now understood the truth. The hospitality had never been about kindness. It had been preparation. They had dressed it with smiles and gifts, but it was always leading to this moment, to this binding. He was not guest, not friend, not even prisoner. He was center, and the ritual was only just beginning. The night was restless and long. He lay awake in the stone house, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of the drums that came and went like waves against a shore. Sleep never reached him. Every time his eyes closed, he saw the glowing circle, the kneeling crowd, the word promise echoing in his ears. When the first pale light crept into the sky, the door opened without a sound. 2 tall figures entered, cloaked in black, their faces hidden. They did not speak. They simply gestured for him to rise. He followed them into the morning air. The entire tribe was waiting outside, rows of silent figures stretching as far as he could see. No one smiled this time. No food, no gift, no drink. Only expectation, heavy as stone. At the center of the square stood the leader, red cloak flowing, eyes burning brighter than fire. They lifted a staff carved from dark wood, its top crowned with a crystal that pulsed faintly, beating like a heart. The leader spoke words that rolled like thunder. The crowd responded, each syllable striking the air in perfect rhythm. They were not cheering. They were binding him with sound, weaving a cage of voices. The black-cloaked figures led him to the circle again, but this time the earth was not bare. The ground had been covered with patterns, strange spirals and jagged lines drawn in glowing powder. The circle burned brighter than before, as if alive. When he stepped inside, the air grew thick. It pressed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. The leader raised the staff and the chant shifted. The sound grew deeper, slower, as though the entire planet was humming along. Figures emerged from the crowd, draped in silver cloth, their faces painted with the same glowing symbols. They surrounded him, moving in unison, their hands raised high. Their voices called his name again and again, twisting it into something unrecognizable. The young alien was among them. Their face was painted too, but their eyes betrayed fear. When they passed close, their lips barely moved, whispering through clenched teeth. "Do not resist." Not yet. The human's stomach turned. He wanted to fight, to run, but the weight of so many eyes, so many voices held him still. The leader approached and touched the mark on his hand. The pain flared sharp and hot, spreading up his arm, across his chest, searing into his bones. He gasped, nearly falling. But the silver-cloaked figures caught him, holding him upright as if he were too precious to let collapse. The leader spoke again, words thick with power. At the end of the chant, the staff struck the ground and the circle of symbols blazed like fire. The crowd roared. The human felt the heat surge through his body, every nerve alive with burning light. He clenched his teeth, refusing to scream. But inside his mind, thunder crashed. He saw flashes, visions not his own. Strange stars, alien births, the joining of bodies under crimson skies. He saw himself standing among them, no longer outsider but bound, blood and soul tied to their future. The vision filled him with dread, yet the force of it left no room for denial. The silver-cloaked figures moved closer, their hands brushing against him, their voices softer now, almost tender. They were not touching him as prisoner but as prize. The ritual was not only about worship. It was about union, about weaving him into their bloodline, about claiming his humanity as a bridge to their prophecy. He understood now why they had called him chosen. The leader's voice cut through the haze. They spoke his name one last time, then raised the staff high. The chant stopped. Silence fell heavy, deeper than any silence he had known. The leader's eyes locked on his, unblinking, sharp, full of hunger and certainty. Then came the words he had feared. Choose. The crowd leaned forward as one, waiting. The human's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the weight of their expectation pressing down like chains. He could sense that refusal meant exile at best, death at worst. Yet acceptance meant something more terrifying, a surrender of himself, a binding that could never be broken. The young aliens stood across the circle, their gaze desperate, silently pleading with him. Their fingers brushed against their hidden stone, the same kind they had given him, a secret hope, a secret way out maybe. His mind raced. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his body was locked in place, frozen between survival and surrender. The leader lowered the staff slowly, pointing it at his chest. The air around him trembled. The ground pulsed with light. The tribe leaned closer, their breath quickening. The ritual had reached its peak. His choice would seal it. His choice would decide not just his fate, but theirs. He swallowed hard, his voice caught in his throat, and as the first word formed, the circle blazed brighter than ever, swallowing his shadow in fire. The fire of the circle rose high around him, flames of light without smoke, heat without ash. The ground pulsed as if alive, every symbol burning with a rhythm that matched his own heartbeat. The leader's staff trembled in the air, the crystal flashing with each breath, and the tribe stood still, waiting for his answer. Time slowed into silence. Every face turned toward him. Every eye demanded surrender. The human stood frozen, caught between fear and fury. His mark burned hot across his hand, sending waves of fire through his body. He felt weak, yet inside that weakness a spark of defiance stirred. He had wandered across many stars, survived alone in hostile worlds, fought storms of ice and fire, and now here, among these smiling hosts who hid cages behind kindness, he was expected to bend, to become something they wanted instead of himself. The leader stepped closer, their voice deep and certain. They spoke his name not as a question but as a command, twisting it into a vow. The tribe answered with one sound, one thunderous breath of agreement. The human felt the circle close tighter around him. If he accepted, they would lift him as God, as mate, as future. If he refused, they would destroy him and call it destiny. The young alien moved from the crowd, eyes fierce now, no longer hiding fear. They pressed both hands against the glowing ground and the symbols flickered. The human understood the risk they took, and for the first time he saw that his fate might not be sealed. The stone in his pocket felt heavier than ever, a key to something beyond this ritual. His voice broke through the silence at last. He spoke slowly, each word carrying across the circle. He did not promise. He did not surrender. He only said, "I will choose my own path." The words struck the air like a crack of thunder. The crowd gasped, some stepping back in shock. The leader's face twisted, their smile sharp with rage. The staff slammed into the ground and the circle flared blinding white. The human staggered as the mark on his hand burned like molten metal. Pain seared through him, but he held his ground, refusing to kneel. The leader shouted, their words no longer soft but roaring with command. The tribe answered, their voices rising in anger, their perfect harmony breaking into chaos. The young alien ran forward, shoving through the others, and pressed something into his hand, the stone. Their voice was a whisper against the storm. "Break it." He closed his fist and felt the sharp edges cut into his palm. The mark on his skin burned hotter, as if the stone spoke to it. For a breathless moment, the fire around him faltered. The symbols flickered. He slammed the stone to the ground. It shattered with a sound like lightning. The circle screamed, light bursting outward, throwing the tribe back. The leader stumbled, the staff shaking in their grip. The human fell to his knees, gasping, but the mark on his hand dimmed, its fire broken. The silence that followed was heavy and raw, filled with disbelief. The leader roared, pointing the staff at him, but the young alien stood between them, arms outstretched. Their painted face glowed with defiance. They shouted in their own tongue, words filled with courage. The tribe hesitated, voices murmuring, eyes darting between the leader and the two figures standing against them. The human rose slowly, still weak, but unbroken. He faced the leader with steady eyes. "I am not your promise," he said, voice sharp and clear. "I am not your guest. I am not your mate. I am my own." The words cut deeper than any blade. The tribe shivered under them, their chants faltering. The leader snarled, raising the staff again, but the crystal no longer shone. The power had slipped. The ritual was undone. Some of the tribe knelt, confused, fearful. Others turned away, whispering. The young alien stepped closer to him, their hand brushing his shoulder, grounding him in the storm. They looked at him with something new in their eyes. Hope. The human knew he could not stay. He had broken their ritual, shattered their promise. Whether they saw him as savior or cursed, this place would never be safe again. He turned toward the path, toward the waiting forest beyond the village. The young alien followed, silent but firm at his side. Together they walked past the fallen circle, past the broken chants, past the eyes that no longer knew whether to worship or to hate. The drums did not start again. The air held only silence, heavy and strange, as if the planet itself was stunned. With each step, the human felt the weight of chains lifting, though the mark still glowed faint on his skin. It was not gone, but it was his now, no longer theirs. At the edge of the forest, he looked back once. The leader stood in the circle, cloak torn, staff dim. The tribe no longer sang, no longer smiled. Their hospitality was broken, their secret revealed, and in their silence the human knew that though the ritual was ended, its shadow would follow him. But he walked on, shoulders straight, fire in his chest. He had faced their lie, broken their bond, and claimed his own choice. Whatever awaited beyond the forest, it would be his, not theirs.